And yeah, another question ahead on your PowerPoint, it's, talking about exceedances.
Yeah.
For us practitioners, whenever we're trying to plan a burn and we're looking at the weather, and our prescription says maybe we're out of, we're in an exceedance if we have 25% or less relative humidity. Some of us might try to get an amendment or try to get a variance to get that plan still approved because we have maybe X, Y, and Z mitigation factors in place that will still allow for a successful burn, even though we're out of a prescription on that humidity. So what exactly is your forecast when you mention exceedances? What is that going to look like that's going to help a practitioner out?
Well, what it would look like is, say it's a day where we are forecasting, let's say you've got to get a variance at an RH below 25%, but our forecast is 24%. What we might say is, our forecast, the most likely outcome is a forecast of 24%. But let's say 20%, I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing that the level at which you have to get a variance and the level that probably causes a fire practitioner true, genuine concern are probably two different things sometimes. So let's say your level of true, genuine concern is 20%. You might get a forecast from us that says 24%, but then we could also say there's only a 20% chance that it would fall below 20%. So you could start to get, ultimately, part of this whole move toward, I think move toward probability-based forecast is to better represent the inherent uncertainty that comes with every forecast. Right now, I know we give you a single number, and that does a pretty poor job of expressing the level of uncertainty with forecasts. But yet it's kind of what you need, and it's what the current system is basically designed to accommodate.
So what I think would be really helpful is like you could say, especially like say a spot weather forecast, like, hey, yes, that's you're going to get, there's a 20% chance that the RH is going to get below 25%, but it's only going to be for an hour of the day before it. So it's going to happen at say between 1,300 and 1,500 hours. So just make sure you have any of your downwind stuff all secured by then, and you're all good to go.
Yeah. And that's a good point, actually. In fact,
That's not a good thing to pin up.
Yeah. As we come up with ways to express this and ways to tailor it in ways that will be genuinely useful to the fire community and fire practitioners, the hour by hour breakdown of percentages may be something we have to look into. Yeah.
It just tells me that I need to build black faster before I hit that 24%.
Yeah. Burn faster.
So I can imagine where the exceedance values would be useful, and that's probably where we're going to go in the future. But the one thing that comes to my mind is when things do go badly, and this does go to people that don't understand fire, let's say a judge, and you have a number that says 25%, well, that's clear.
Yeah.
But when we start to have these ranges, it's less clear, and where is the liability and who is at fault and at what point was there a bad decision made becomes a lot less clear.
Yeah. And some of that may eventually come down to a point of establishing policy. I mean, for example, you're probably not going to set a policy where if 25% is your cutoff, where you're not allowed to do a burn because there's a 5% chance of the RH dropping below 25%. That would be, I think most people would agree most people would probably agree that's pretty silly. But where do you,
What's prudent and judicious?
Yeah. And of course, I know in my, even over on the weather side, generally we won't get faulted, for example, for forecasting a certain weather parameter or a certain weather event or issuing a tornado warning, for example. But you know, where we get into trouble is, where we don't have a tornado warning, for example, out on something that is like twice as strong as we would normally warn on. In other words, because somebody was asleep at the wheel, or was it because we followed policy procedure and it still didn't work out? Yeah.
Just a quick question, and to cover your questions, I'm so loud anyway. To cover your questions, when you write your prescription, to cover all of this in terms, just write a wider range, would that be okay, or not?
You'd almost have to have a lawyer to make that extra page.
Oh,
I'm serious.
thank you.
Yeah, well, I have a question. This is national, is that true?
Yeah, this is national. I know the training that we just got last week. You know, this is being done at every office around the country. It's actually one of the agency's top goals is to get more into probabilistic forecasting and expressing more aspects of the forecast probabilistically than just the chance of rain, which we've been doing for decades. And ultimately, though, I mean, the end goal is not just to express the forecast probabilistically. That's not the goal in itself. The goal ultimately is, you know, us applying those probabilities to thresholds that are actually meaningful to you. So, you know, 20% is what's meaningful. That's where we'll gear, you know, the forecast. So, so ultimately, you know, the goal is to put out something that's going to be useful and meaningful to you, not just to pat ourselves on the back because we've learned ways to couch and cushion forecast.
That's great. Any other weather related questions before we move on to habitat and fuels, I guess?
What does, I know you said that the distinction between a meteorologist and a climatologist is like a couple hours, but what is La Nina, looking like for next year?
Let's see, if you're talking hurricane season.
Might as well.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, this is kind of affects the trees we're growing.
Yeah. Well, for next year, the way the forecasts are going right now is as we enter next year's hurricane season, right now we're supposed to be back in neutral conditions. This past year we were in La Nina. We were coming into La Nina, which historically comes with more active hurricane seasons. But by the same token, last year we had El Nino, which historically comes with quiet hurricane seasons, but yet we still ended up with Idalia and got way down on the alphabet list of names. Some of that was because the ocean was warmer last year than it has been in a lot of recent years, but
So it all depends, right?
it all depends, yeah. But yeah, if we're back to neutral, we actually haven't had a neutral season probably in about 5 or 6 years. So I'll take anything different than what we've had.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take the initiative to ask Dr. Crandall a question, or series of questions that kind of sticking in my mind. So you gave several examples of simply the fuels, the habitat not changing radically. I think I infer right, those are in already well fire main ecosystems that are already being maintained by fire pretty well. And I'm just wondering about the restoration issues. So if you got like a flatwoods that's really overgrown with gallberry, or you've got a flatwoods that's got encroachment from tie from a nearby swamp, that's happened over decades. So obviously, yes, some change happened. The whole thing wasn't static, but do you see that it's much more difficult then to alter those fuels over time? It's kind of like the lesson you were showing was it's hard to get a whole lot of change in your vegetation structure. Is that also true when you've got these ecosystems so out of whack with this woody encroachment? What's the deal there?
So good question. So first, I want to go back to, you know, my talk and the systems that I was talking about. And, you know, I would say the systems we're working in, they're these nicely maintained systems. They've had periodic fire for 30 to 40 years. And the main message that I sort of want to get across there is that you don't have to be 100% focused on one season. There's a little bit of leeway there in terms of, you know, burning during a different season, as long as you're maintaining your frequency, the species will still be there. You're not eliminating anything, right? In terms of restoration, you know, you have to think about what's there and you have to think about the structure. So you can reintroduce fire, certainly, and I have a study I could have presented on this, but unless you also restore the structure of that ecosystem, then often you're not gonna maybe get the response that you might expect. So it's not just about reintroducing the disturbance in terms of fire, but it's also about thinking about the structure. Now, when you're talking about going from point A, you know, to point B, you have to really think about what's there at point A. What is your system? What are the characteristics of your system? And how are you gonna get to point B? Fire alone often will not get you to point B, but once again, it depends on the system. It depends on where you are with point A. So I think I just gave you a meteorologist answer to that question, no offense. But, you know, I can really say that it depends, right? You really need to know your site, the characteristics of that site, and, you know, your goal, some sort of reference system that you're trying to work towards.
Does that bring up more questions from anyone on that? What was that? Oh, yeah.
For Dr. Crandall, I used to be involved in retired now, and a lot of work on social and donor side management as well. There's some anecdotal evidence out there that if you have a particular sandhill wiregrass site that has been burned in a decade, you get the first countries and burn, that you get really high quality high germination seed from that site. Use any resource that supports that.
He's got another microphone. Oh, that was dead?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it got dropped.
So the question is, if you have a long unburned site, you have remnant wiregrass there, right? And you burn it during growing season, you're gonna get really high quality seed. So we actually did that study. We had a long unburned site. And we had some remnant wiregrass that hadn't burned in about 30 to 40 years. These were sandhill sites at Ordway Swisher Biological Station. And we found that when you burned them, that they did flower. Now, are the seeds any more or any better quality than the seed that you would find in a regularly burned site? No, we didn't find significantly higher germination of those seeds, but the seeds did germinate, the plants did flower, produce seeds, even in areas that hadn't burned in 30 to 40 years, good stuff, you know, during the burn and all that. You know, and I'll also say, like, I love wiregrass. I think anybody knows me knows I love wiregrass. We have a whole wiregrass blog. And so a lot of questions about wiregrass, they're answered on that blog. It's ecologionfire.com. You go there, you'll see there's a tab for our wiregrass blog. If there's a question there that you don't have answered, let us know. We'll write a new blog post. So even everything from, if you wanted to test the viability of your seeds, you can actually do a press test, a vortex press test. We have a YouTube video on there that shows you how to do that test so you can determine whether your seed is filled or not and give you some indication of maybe, you know, how dense you should sow your seed. So I'm also happy to do workshops on wiregrass. If folks are interested, I'll bring in my forceps. I'll teach you how to test wiregrass seed. Yeah, anything wiregrass related, happy to help.
Have a follow-up? What if you have a drought condition during seed ripening? How does that affect you?
What if you have drought conditions during seed ripening? That is a very good question. So we have data from previous research and also from ours where we looked at the specific dates of burn and the precipitation following or before. We tried all kinds of different things. You know, and I will say, we're collecting more data, because I don't know that the signal is not strong enough for me yet. And so we have not published it yet, but expected in the next couple of years. What we've found so far in our analyses is that seed production is highest when you have a good amount of, and I don't know what good amount is, sorry, I'll have to look at my data. When you have a good amount of precipitation in the 6 weeks following the burn. If you don't have precipitation, and you have a drought in that 6 weeks following the burn, you're gonna have significant, from what our data shows so far, significantly fewer filled seeds. They'll still flower, the flowers are still there, it's just the proportion of filled seeds is much lower. Most of the seeds, you know, when we test them in the lab, they germinate, you know, with no problem, as long as they're filled. And so that's the key there.
6 weeks, you said, 6 weeks. Roughly.
But we're still testing, we want more data, we're actually gonna test it across, we have data from across the range of wiregrass, and we're actually gonna go into Vista stricta. So we have a lot more that we wanna do on that to be able to give a solid answer. Now, can you tell me whether they're gonna have rain in the next 6 weeks and enough to produce wiregrass? So that's where you run into this issue, right? Where you can't always say you're gonna have a specific amount or set amount of rain in the 6 weeks following burn. So, yeah.
So I burned, and within 6 weeks after the burn, there was good rain.
We
It's
looked
now
at the total
everything.
amount, we looked at the total amount of
Yeah.
rain in the 6 weeks. Now we tested all kinds of things. We tested 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. We tested all kinds of different things. We even tested, you know, intervals where when they were actually flowering, thinking if rain occurred when they're actually flowering, that would increase seed fill. So I don't know what the mechanism is there, and the signal is not, as I said, strong enough for me to publish that yet, because anything I publish, I want you all to be able to go and read it and say, okay, I know I can trust that science. Don't trust it quite yet, but anecdotally, preliminarily, rain afterwards.
Got it. So I've been worried with the drought now, and it did rain, but it's so dry now, I'm worried. And I've got great seed from my burn in May 31st. But I'm worried now it's so dry, and the seed's gonna
Send me
drop.
some seed.
The seed's gonna drop and not grow.
Oh, now that's a different thing. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I think you're gonna say it's something.
But you've seen it out there.
Yeah,
It
so
looks like
she has already a lot of wiregrass, so she doesn't need necessarily to, I think, grow that much, right, her wiregrass population now.
I'm voracious.
Oh,
yeah. I get that.
So again, great, okay. But I think wiregrass is a fantastic plant. It's great to like build the structure and terrifier. But we also want a lot of different plants and a lot of diversity. So if you have 1 year where, for example, you have your wiregrass that you burn and doesn't produce that much viable seeds, if you know that you're consistent with your management and in the next, years you just keep burning and keep doing everything you can, I think 1 year of not very productive wiregrass, and I'm looking at you, hoping you're right, it may be good because you may have other species that maybe occupy that soil space and bring more diversity. So
Yeah. So 2 things on that. First, we were really curious about how dense is wiregrass in these established areas that are burned really frequently. We find there's slightly more in sandhills than in flatwoods, but on average, about 1.5 to 2 plants per meter square in like established, well-managed ground cover. So in a lot of restoration areas, the wiregrass is much denser than it's probably eventually going to be. Now, there have been a couple of studies out there, one that my lab has done, we haven't published it yet, where we do see some self-thinning of wiregrass. You can see that with trees and such, right? Where they're just too dense and they start to thin. There's also been some studies, Appalachian Blossom Ravine, I think was one site, and then what's the military, Eglin. It was a study done by Catherine Hovain, who found about the same density of wiregrass and found that they actually have a predictable spatial pattern. So they will self-thin into sort of this pattern over time. So you can plant as much as you want, but eventually they're gonna get to that level. Eventually, who knows how long that takes, right? So the other thing is, what about a drought? Okay, I put down seeds, put down wiregrass seed, now I have a drought. Nothing came up. It might the next year. We have found our wiregrass seeds come up the next year. Chris knows this. We were in the field going, what? So just because you plant it and you don't get anything in that first year, we cannot replicate it in a lab. I will tell you that. In a lab where like these seeds look like they're absolutely dead. But in the field, they've germinated the next year. Yeah. And
Yeah,
there's the
and
expert.
Ray, the delayed germination thing, that is something that we saw a lot at EBRP. And in the 20 years that we did that work out, that I was involved in the work of wiregrass restoration, I was always amazed that our quality of our seed and the germination rates was pretty even across the years, whether it was drought up and down. And something that I would throw out there is don't get so keyed in on the precipitation. That is important. But if you've ever gone out in the morning after wiregrass has started to flush back out again, the leaves are 10 inches or so, they're sopping wet
Yeah.
with dew, and they are absolutely making use of that form of water. It's not as good as a half-inch of rain, but it is definitely something.
Yeah. And if anyone online didn't hear that, David just mentioned that there's so much dew, even if we're not getting precipitation and we're in drought, there's so much dew. Those plants are getting some water. And I was gonna say, I had a conversation with Mark Larson not too long ago, who mentioned that he planted wiregrass seed just some years ago, and absolutely nothing came up the first year. He was kind of stunned that absolutely nothing. The next year, a ton of wiregrass. So give it time if it doesn't come up the first year.
Just one other quick question. I put the wiregrass seed with sandpine plantation restored at 2017, 18, the pines went in the beginning. And I've been religiously burning it May, early June, every 2 years. And it's looking pretty good. And when do I start playing with, because I agree, there's a little bias, just after a while. Is it still too young to start playing with doing like a winter burn or it was 2017?
I mean, I would say it would depend on your management objectives. But I mean, this is something Dr. Baruzzi and I were talking about, over lunch. Having variation, within a site and between sites is so important. Imagining that you're, a little gopher tortoise, you may find some of the resources you need in one burn and you find other resources in another burn. So having those patches, that patch mosaic available, I would say is really important. So thinking more holistically about what your goals are and whether you can provide, that mosaic, I think would be important. Now, if your goal is to produce wiregrass seed.
No, it's.
Okay.
Bring that habitat.
That's where I always go back to. It depends on your management goals.
Yeah.
As to when you're burning and how often you're burning, and your site too. Of course, you have to know your site. Did you want to say that?
So I have a question for you, Annie. What is your objective for doing a dormant season burn? I can maybe understand if you wanted to do like an earlier spring or a later growing season, June or July, but I'm not seeing where doing a dormant season burn is going to help you on your trajectory for anything.
Bringing habitat back.
Yeah, I don't see it. I'd be curious to hear what somebody else has to offer on that.
Oh, no, I think, because I had a conversation with them about that, and I think her main goal is really getting to know her property and looking at the results herself to see what happens. So I think her sites are very clear, and they're very well maintained. At least from the conversation that you and I had, I thought there was just a lot of curiosity to see like what happens if I do this, what happens if I do that, which I personally love and I tend to support, because I mean she's doing a great job, and I think the more she gets to know and gets to see what are the results of the management types, even if sometimes she may get things wrong, I don't think she'll ever get to the point where the sites get out of hand. But I don't know what's your perspective in that.
Well, I was just curious that, you know, if I burned, like, maybe not dormant season, but would that get more, there are, as I've seen at ABRP, awesome sandhill spring blooming things, which you hardly ever get. And, you know, so just if I did a burn at a different time, maybe I'd get the Amsonia, or I'd get the fox, you know, or, you know, some of those spring blooming things with that.
Do you have those on your property?
Yes,
Okay. I'm not sure about the burn season on those, but maybe somebody in the room does.
Which ones, or if you want to bring back out?
Blocks.
or just variety, because,
The
you know,
spring blowers?
yeah.
It'll fall on.
And fall burns, I mean, they do make me hesitate slightly because there's so many animals relying on those resources in the fall that,
Yeah.
you know, I just wouldn't burn a large area
Yeah.
at the end of the fall, a small area to
Yeah,
test
I
it
would
out,
do
but I would be hesitant that you're removing all of those resources for the animals and pollinators that need them. And I'll say, you know, the main reason, you know, where I would sort of encourage, you know, a dormant or a winter burn is operationally. Man, you all have so much land to burn and limited resources. And so that's where, you know, I want to give the message that if you're burning, you're doing a good job because you're getting it done. And if it's not always during the growing season, that's okay. You're still getting your burning done. We have limited days during the growing season, and some of you have so much acreage, you're simply not going to get it all done during the growing season.
Another thing too, you could try is mechanical route. Do a little bit of working, forestry mulching. And really the best way to do the mulch is to get somebody that has a diamond deck, more like a mower deck, not the barrel, flat. And that does a lot. It'll still take out what you need to take out, but it doesn't dig into the ground like the barrel.
Yeah, I don't need to take anything out anymore. It's all,
Yeah.
like, well, I was just,
Without having to burn, you could try that, do, you know, do a couple of hashes. And do
I, they're 2006.
The folks online cannot hear you all, so I need to pass this around.
Yeah, oh, well, that's right, we can stop, yeah, we can stop talking. I'm sorry, I'm asking so many questions. But thank you all for the advice.
The deep dive in workers, so it's good. Does anybody have any more wildlife related questions before we move on to the next presenter? I have one, but it's probably like hours worth, so I don't know if I can ask it.
Oh my goodness.
Now we're good.
Yeah,
Here,
I'm gonna extend this till 1800. No, my question is, I'm afraid that, when I look online, I see a lot of misinformation out there especially in the social media sphere. And I've seen that, become an actual issue with prescribed fire and wildlife and responses. And I know there's no easy answer to this, but like for the common practitioner out here, how would you suggest they deal with the crazy? Like where somebody is, you know, there's some online personality on YouTube that's like, you're killing all the turkeys. Stop it, I'm talking to my congressperson today.
The bear people.
Yeah, add them in the mix.
I mean, that's a very hard question, we should ask it at the beginning in the list of hard questions, but. Well, I would recommend, there are a lot of really good extension, documents, like for example, I'm from UF, so I know you have resources, like we have the IFAS documents, that are extension documents that summarize the latest research on certain topics. And there are some specific on wildlife, so fire and wildlife, and I honestly, my approach in general is providing the resources, like and stating information, without engaging in to speak about the date, because sometimes it's hard to change people's opinions. Other times, so there are things that I think are pretty helpful, like there are videos online that can show, like for example, I actually did it once. There was a lady, there was a person that was really, really convinced that fire killed deer. And no, yes, that, you know, fire is very harmful for deer, and I mean, there are papers, like there is plenty of research that shows, for example, deer mortality depending on, you know, predators and fire. But since there are also lines on videos of deer literally just walking away from a fire and being super calm, I just think that if you can find those resources, there is just a video and it's very like fast and easy and simple for people to watch. That's a very good resource. Oh yes, good, sorry. So yeah, and for this one, South Fire Exchange, and a lot of resources. Yes, I don't know, everybody knows the website, right, about the South Fire Exchange, and yeah, there's a page with all the resources. I'm sorry for not mentioning that.
Good plug.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you, and thanks to the whole panel for their insight, and I know that was a little impromptu, but I'm glad we had more time than just standard question and answer after the presentation. So thanks, everybody.